Hello, and welcome to Stories from the View, a podcast from the Pleasant View Senior Center in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. On this podcast, we invite East Longmeadow residents to tell us their stories about their lives and events. And today's guests are Rich Mastrodonado and Dave Mallalieu, who are they are stamp collectors, and they're here to talk about stamps. And here's your moderator, Mary Jenowyn Kaplan.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome, Dave and Rich, to our podcast, Stories from the View. I know nothing about stamp collecting, so I am very anxious to hear about your experiences as collectors and also about the group and the leadership you're providing right here at the Pleasant View Center recently. So welcome. Let's start with Rich. How did you get involved in stamp collecting?
Well, my mother's cousin, originally from Worcester, Mass, and when I was about 12 years old, he gave me some stamps, and he was a major stamp collector, and he got me started on it. And as a youth and teenager into a young adult, I was an avid collector and collector of other things. And I think everyone kind of runs in a family collecting. And it's been a joy. I mean, it's very interesting. And you're always finding something different, something new. It's not just stamps, but it's covers, which is the whole envelope with the proper usage of the stamp on the envelope. And it's first day covers and postal history. And it just goes on and on and on. But it keeps your interest because there's always more to learn, more to find out about.
Amazing. And so, Dave, how long have you been a stamp collector and what you started?
81 years.
81 years. Excellent.
I started when I was 7 years old. I'm 88.
And how did you get started? Did someone give you a stamp?
My parents inherited the home of my grandparents on my mother's side. And lo and behold, when we moved in, we found innumerable boxes of correspondence, envelopes with letters from the late 1800s, early 1900s that my grandfather had taken home from his business, which was treasurer of the Heinz Pickle Company. And my father got interested in looking at that and started taking the stamps off the envelopes, soaking the envelopes or portions in water, and collecting the stamps, and he got all four of us children involved. And from my viewpoint, my interest peaked immediately and has never waned 1 second. Unlike most people who take a break when they go to college, which I did, or get married and have children, I collected avidly all the time.
And is that how you process the stamps, by soaking them and removing them from an envelope?
When the envelope had no other interest or value. But generally speaking, if it's an old envelope or stamp, if it was in good condition and had an appropriate message to tell, like the town, the date, or other events, such as on certain covers would have what we call corner cards, which were in the upper left corner, the address of the sender, usually businesses. But even people would then put their names up there. But usually if it was a cover that had no value, we'd pull the stamp off by soaking it in water. And I've soaked 1 million stamps if I've soaked one. But the point is that the first motivation is just the wonderment as a child, 7 years old, and seeing these finely engraved stamps. And the U.S. started off right off the bat with very intricate engravings. And all the original stamps had either of three famous founders of our country, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, or Thomas Jefferson. And those were the only images on our stamps for quite a few number of years. And later on, other people
changing.
were shown, and then finally pictorial stamps that showed events such as the Pony Express. Or,
Now they're showing
many
rock
different-
musicians and
So my original motivation was just the thrill of owning something that was old and very beautiful. And for you, I brought these just to show you what I'm talking about. But in the upper left-hand corner are our first two stamps. This is number 1 and that's number 2.
I am so sorry our radio audience can't see these because they are very beautiful. I don't want to minimize the fine etching, but it's pretty pictures.
But eventually, without realizing it, you gain many different areas of knowledge, particularly geography, history, famous people, famous events, and basically the culture of a innumerable portion of the people in the world. And that springs into a love of history and, of course, a love of stamps.
So it's not just the stamps, it's the story behind the stamp
Absolutely.
yes, and the covers and
and where it's been.
where it's
Maybe.
been the cancellations.
Right. And,
Okay.
I have a few show and tell things for you
Yeah.
people.
I'm personally, I like covers more than the single stamp, and I like the cancellations from different cities, different countries, registered covers. Back in the 1800s, you had a postmaster in Waterbury, Connecticut. We used to carve the cancels on cork. So he did skull and crossbones, maple leaves, stars, all kinds of things. And
Sounds like a little
just
more
Yeah.
freedom than our post office
oh,
today.
absolutely. Interesting story down at Elephant's Trunk Flea Market down in Lower Connecticut near Danbury. An individual found a Waterbury cancel. This is probably about 25 years ago. It was a skull and crossbones. Okay, he picked it out of a junk box. Anyways, he showed it in Lynn's. They show covers in Lynn's. Lynn's is a newspaper that stamp collecting started back probably in the 30s. Okay, and they have each week they have showcase a cover. So that's what he did with his. Anyways, a dealer from California saw it. He offered him $225,000 for that cover. Now this is rare, and he flew out and paid the guy $225,000 for that cover. So, there are some examples of covers that go for a lot of money and cancellations. That was a rare cancel.
I thought you were going to show me your copy.
Well, I do have Waterbury cancels, but not
Oh, you
not
do?
Not the 250.
Not the
Yeah.
not the-
Darn.
I have the common ones.
So,
Can we, I'm sorry, can we go back a second? Because some people might not be even familiar with what a cancellation is
Correct.
on an envelope. So could you explain that a little bit?
I can explain that very well.
Okay, go
There's
ahead,
some
Dave.
cancellations, exactly what he was talking about. Now, one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that you don't have to spend a lot of money to have
Correct.
a lot of fun. And I want to back up a little bit and say that in addition to the things I've already said about stamp collecting, one of the most important things is it's a soul activity. You do it yourself. You have no boss and you have no one else to be involved unless you want them. And of course, we do get involved at the club. But when we're home and we want solitude, stamp collecting is a therapy, as any hobby can be, if you really get into it, because there's so much detail and so many avenues to explore, you completely forget about your troubles. And I'm 88 years old and I've had lots of health issues. But I believe that my collecting stamps has definitely kept me going, without exaggeration, as any activity will if you use it as a if it's kind of a passion.
I would like to stop you there because so many times we hear there are some people who, when they retire, wonder how they're going to fill their days. And it seems as if, and I think before we started our broadcast, you mentioned during COVID, there was an uptick in interest.
Correct.
But perhaps someone who was a collector as a youth or as a young adult, when they retire, this is a wonderful way to keep your mind engaged and to have some therapy for yourself, but also, and we'll get into that, talk about the camaraderie of the club when that happens. So
The club is very important.
it sounds like this isn't just a book of the stamps. Do you have favorite stamps? Could you share with us like one example of a stamp you have that is interesting or you're proud of, or tell us a stamp story.
Any stamp is of interest to me.
One, yeah, okay.
But I brought some show and tell. And you can photograph these because I've done interviews before, by the way, for the Springfield Republican in their Sunday paper. And they were successful in taking pictures. Now, if you don't need the picture, fine. But he mentioned the court cancellations. It's worth noting that at the outset of the stamp use for mailing letters, there had to be some way of canceling them so that they wouldn't get reused. So they obliterated them with these oftentimes very ugly cancels. But postal clerks and postmasters with time on their hands they used a cork and a ink pad, and they take this cork and would be that big around, and they'd mutilate the stamp. But some got creative and they started making designs, and some, as Rich mentioned in detail, very intricate. And that's the thing about the Waterbury court cancels. They are the most intricate of all. Now, these are not intricate, but the point I wanted to make is you can have a lot of fun with cheap stamps. And I actually have one album that says, having fun with cheap stamps. This stamp is a 2-cent Columbian issued in 1893. It's supposed to be issued in 1892, but they couldn't get all the buildings to the Columbian Exposition that were being built for the 400th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of America in time. So they actually issued the stamps in 1893. There was over 1 billion of these stamps printed. I mean, the population in the United States at that time probably wasn't any more than 125 million people.
Right.
There's plenty of these to go around. But you will not see something like this very often. This is scarce. Not valuable, but scarce. Because what I did, I had the benefit of a older gentleman in a club who gave me a big photo album full of these stamps he had collected as a kid. He was alive during this period of time. There was thousands of these stamps. And he said, you can have all the stamps from this book you want, return the book, but you got to do something with the stamps. So I did. I got about 12, 14 pages like this of different Columbians. But this stamp obviously is very common. But you won't see this. And what this is I somehow started to notice that the court cancellations of some certain types appeared often. And I finally discovered that some appeared not only often, but almost in the same place on the stamp. That is rare, not valuable, but unusual and rare. And you can just take a couple seconds and notice how similar these stamps that are paired, even to the point in a couple cases where the cancellation's on the same part of the stamp.
It is astonishing. And different designs, pinwheel and cross, target.
There are some people that collect strictly fancy cancels.
Can you collect stamps that are not canceled?
Oh, absolutely. Mint unused stamps, yes. Yeah. Personally, I like used with the cancels. But there are some people that only want the mint stamps and they want the gum that fresh, without hinges. Hinges is a way of mounting the stamps on the pages. Now they use the, I don't know if you have an example of the mounts. They use the black mounts that the stamp is encased in the mount. So your gum is like new and the face is like new. So it's all, various
The collecting
collecting.
business has evolved.
right.
And
right.
over the
Oh,
years,
yeah,
I
yeah.
bet you've seen that.
Yeah, one of the problems with the older stamps, the people
Yeah.
were only interested at the beginning, just of
Front.
putting the stamps on a page. And sometimes it was an unused stamp, they look at, and put it on a page. Well, they just, by today's standards, devalued it by doing that by a factor of 2 or 3 or 4.
Right.
But later on, they started using hinges, but the original hinges
It was,
only existed because they fabricated them from the, what we call the selvage or the border around the stamps, because the sheets had margins around the edges. And since they were all glued,
Right.
eventually underneath, they would cut little strips from the sheet margin and use them as hinges to mount them in pages. But those hinges were very hard to remove, and a lot of stamps were damaged beyond repair when they removed them.
and then I've seen them with the
Today they have
heavy paper
yeah.
type hinges. It totally destroys the stamp.
Now, in line with cheap stamps, this is another specialty of mine, cancellations. Now, this is an early British stamp, but again, probably printed certainly in the multi-millions. And what I did was, over the years, after examining literally thousands of these, I bought innumerable collections, and all of them would have these British stamps, which were very common, but not common the way you see them here. Again, not valuable, but unusual. And some of them may have extra value. And what this page shows, and I'm going to show it to you, is the different numerals that are put on the stamps when canceled. And by the way, usually they did not come right dead center on a stamp. 90% of them were off, so you couldn't even read the total number. But each number stood for a post office. And some of these post offices could be very small towns. And I'm not going to research it at this point. But some of these towns could have been so small that these could be rare numbers. And you'll see they go from 10 up to 900. I don't have a sequence. But you'll notice that virtually all the numbers are bold, neat, and these were filtered probably, I bet you I probably looked at 5,000 of these to get this page.
And so you can track the history of the stamp and where it sort of traveled from. And where you said you purchased them, where do you get stamps?
Well,
Do I have to write to you?
No, the Rich will vouch for
Well,
this.
a number of years ago in Springfield, we had probably half a dozen stamp dealers downtown. Now they're all gone. So it was Maxi K. There was a Suburban Stamp Company. I forget a couple of other ones, 4 or 5 other ones down there. Now they're all gone. So you could go to a stamp store and you could buy the stamps, missing stamps, buy the piece for your album in various conditions,
And you could see them right
And you
then
can
and
see
there.
'em right then
That's
and there.
nice, yeah.
Now, most of that has moved to online. And every now and then, like David says, he's bought collections. You get a phone call, somebody that's selling a collection, you pick up the collection. And
You
go
get to
through
be
it.
known also in the
Right.
community. It's not just from the club.
Right, right.
But I would tell everybody I got stamps. I was a stamp collector, and all my children would, if they got mail from
Right,
overseas,
and
they'd
people
give me a
saving,
stamp.
people.
But the other thing is, Rich, is that there are journals like this one here.
Right.
And in this journal, it'll be innumerable advertisements
Right.
by stamp dealers. And a lot of people will order from these dealers. But the big impact on the hobby, which has changed the hobby in many ways, is the internet
Right.
and eBay. And there's other sites
Right.
that you can buy and sell stamps on.
American Philatelic Society, which is APS, okay, has a web page that the members can sell their doubles. And so and it's a good way to You get stamps,
there's
and you know you're buying the actual stamp. You see, you have to be careful on the internet because some people promote the stamp as extra fine or superb or something like that, and it's not. So
It's interesting because stamp collecting is a historical hobby
Yes.
or endeavor, yet you have to be pretty technological these days to continue to grow your collection. And
Well, if you're going to fill all the spaces, even if it's common stamps, there are many varieties. And that takes study. And if you're willing to put in the time, you might just find something that's a lot more valuable than what appears, because many stamps, especially in certain series where there were different printings along the way, and every time they reprinted the stamp, like they have a certain
little
initial
bit different.
printing, they'd have a certain printing, and then they find out, well, we still need more stamp. The second printing might have been on slightly different paper, or even a different printing press. It might have been a flat plate at the beginning, but then the rotary press was invented, and that created varieties. Then some stamps were printed for coils that would be vended out of a machine. You would put a nickel in the machine, and you get a couple of stamps. They would be vended, and all these stamps have slight differences. And the common sheet stamp might be worth nothing, but a certain coil, which means it's perforated on only two sides, and the other two sides are straight, that could be worth $10,000. Now, in order to differentiate, you have to know which one it is. And if you find a valuable one, if you ever want to sell it, you probably got to get a certificate of authenticity, because nobody's going to buy a $10,000 stamp unless they know it's genuine.
you would send it out to the APS, and they would.
There's many. There's many
That they view it as real and what it is.
So this is all part of the look. And I have to say at this point, that's one of the main, or the beauty of the stamp hobby, is to treasure hunt. Because
Right.
you'll buy a box of covers. And by the way, I have a ton of covers also. I love covers also. But I'm also focused on the individual stamps, because I like to mount them in the albums. And
That's my thrill, is a treasure hunt.
yeah.
I'll go to a flea market. Sometimes I don't find anything, but I like to walk around, look at stuff. But every now and then you come across something that says, wow, if I find one cover that I like, I'm happy. But it's,
Oh, I have found.
But sometimes you find boxes of this stuff. Not as much as you used to. Because of the internet, vendors that clean out houses and so on used to sell the boxes of the stuff and stamps and whatever, magazines, old clippings at the flea markets. Now, you don't have to have knowledge. You just put it on the internet. And they, especially eBay, and they get lucky sometimes. They get a hit. So before, that didn't exist. So
Yeah, if
you could buy a lot of material at the flea markets, especially the clean out people,
Yeah, if you live to the old age of, if I may call ourselves both old men.
Older.
Okay? You probably have been
You're
lucky.
antique, I'm old.
You likely, and Rich is very knowledgeable. And so I don't think we would portray ourselves as experts, but we are very knowledgeable. And to be honest, I can look at a collection of a wide variety of stamps, and I can pick out the best, most valuable ones. And I can even tell you what the price is in the catalog on many of them. Probably 90% of the stamps that are portrayed in a catalog, if you show me the stamp, if it's a U.S. stamp, even an old one, I can probably tell you the catalog value within 10%.
But it sounds to me like you two gentlemen, you're not into this over the value of the stamp.
No, absolutely not.
This is something that you
Pleasure.
just have an interest in, and you're interested in the history of the stamp and that type of thing. I mean, so many people now, if you're cleaning out your grandparents' house or something like that, and you find that the person was a stamp collector, the first thing in people's minds is, oh, I wonder how much this is worth.
Right. Correct.
Whereas for you gentlemen, it just seems like this is an interest, maybe even an obsession in
Passion.
some ways.
Yes, it is.
Say
A
passion.
Yeah, that's
Passion,
good.
passion.
Yeah.
One of the worst things that happened to stamp collecting, in my opinion, back in the late 70s and early 80s, there were companies that were investing in stamps, okay? And people paying crazy money for this material.
Speak up.
And unfortunately, it bottomed out, okay? And it hurt a lot of people because they put a lot of money into stamps, and there's no value. They're just promoted as investments. And a lot of, like I said, a lot of people are disappointed. It's sour taste in their mouths about stamp collecting, and it spread. Okay,
Well, they created a demand that was strictly
Artificial.
hyperbole, and the prices went way up. And then eventually, everybody, like a lot of investments, the dam broke. Got to the point where everybody said, "There's no more bigger fools than I to buy my stamp." I was the last biggest fool, because a lot of people just bought the stamp thinking, I don't care what I pay for it. But when I come to sell it, they'll be a bigger fool than me. But when you run out of the bigger fools,
almost
everything collapses.
almost like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's what happened. But that was a rare thing. I don't think it'll ever happen again.
Well, no, not at this point in time. But
I want to emphasize that value is not lost. I mean, we do search boxes.
Correct.
And take pleasure in finding a stamp worth $50, where we paid $5 for the whole box. And that happens. I'm sure it happened. To
we all do
At
that.
our age, it's happened
But
many,
that $50
many times.
stamp,
Yeah.
it might be listed in the catalog at $50, but the retail value might be $5.
Or it might be 500, depending upon condition.
Well, if it's a perfect stamp,
Yeah.
they do grade stamps and put them in case. It was like they would do with coins, and they grade them like a comic book, 90, 95, or whatever. Right. Bottom line, stamp collecting is a pleasure. You do it for fun, relaxation, but it's probably one of the worst investments out there. You know,
Not exactly in every instance.
not in every instance, unless you have rarities. Unless you have rarities, but you collect stamps for pleasure, not for investment.
Yeah.
Well, here's the situation. If you have modest income and never spend more than $50 or $100 on an individual stamp, and then you retire and at some point you want to sell your collection, it's likely that you will only receive between 5 and 10% of the catalog value. And collectors do this all the time, and they feel like, I've been robbed, because I was paying 50 to 75%. And the reason is there's a trillion stamps out there. And dealers primarily are interested in the $100 up stamps and the $1,000 stamps and the $10,000. Now, they will sell a lot of stamps at a lower price. But when it comes to buying, there are so many stamps, especially in the last 50 or 75 years. Every United States issue commemorative stamp is like 350,000 or more. I'm sorry, 350 million per stamp. Well, after a while, there's enough of these, and people pass on and sell their collection. The dealers got stacks of these.
People used to soak the stamps off envelopes and make bundle wares of 100 of one kind, and used to tie them up with thread, and
Right.
dealers used to buy those.
Yeah, I've seen
And
that.
they would sell packets.
Yeah.
But there were a lot more collectors in the past than there are now. At one point in time, every other person collected stamps at one time in their life. Now maybe it's 1 in 50. There are some people that don't even know what stamp collecting is. I'm the treasurer of the Pioneer Valley Stamp Club. I went over to the Key Bank a couple of years ago, and the manager weighed in on me. And I was probably in his 30s, mid-30s. He says, "Oh, Pioneer Valley Stamp Club. What do you guys do? Collect rubber stamps?" I said,
Oh, like-
and I started laughing. No, we collect stamps from the post office. And she goes to me, why? You know, that's what I'm saying. You know, like I said, it was such a, everybody collected stamps, but now it's declining.
Yeah.
There's so much technology out there. The young kids, they're not even into baseball cards like they used to be.
Right.
Everything's on their tablet or their cell phone or whatever. And then if you've watched Jeopardy, a couple of years back, they had 5 questions on stamp collecting. 3 brainiacs, very knowledgeable people. They couldn't answer one question. These people were all in their 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
So
You were probably throwing things at your TV.
yes, kind of.
You knew those answers.
I didn't believe it. You know, why am? How come I'm not there? You know, but
That's it.
So-
So tell me, you have a group.
yes.
What's with the group? How does this work? Because I've heard it's a solitary, cerebral, tranquil.
Well, you get together
detective work
with
endeavor.
people that have like interests. Mm-hmm.
So
you
you meet
again camaraderie
twice a month here.
twice a month, right?
And-
I belong to 3 clubs. I belong to this club, Pioneer Valley Stamp Club. I belong to the Springfield Club, which is the oldest club in the country. Actually, the Pioneer Valley Stamp Club is an offshoot of the Springfield Club. Okay, I think it's back 1940-ish, and then I belong to the Granby Stamp Club. And a lot of the members of the 3 clubs are all in the same club, and then some we have other people that are just in that one club. But it keeps me very busy. It's a lot of fun, and you have
he just said the magic word.
Interaction with other people with the interest that you have. Okay,
You said the magic word.
fun.
Fun.
Tell us, what's the fun of
That
it?
is, when you roll everything we've set up into one ball, it's fun. And that is certainly the biggest value of collecting stamps or any hobby is you have fun doing it.
You know, golfers they go golfing and chatting and having a good time. People that are into sports sit there and talk about the sports, and they're going back and they're all excited. Well, it's the same with us.
It's
No.
fun for you to look
No.
at parts of someone else's collection,
Collection and-
hear the stories of their hunt for the stamp.
Correct.
And the club is valuable because it does give an opportunity to get beyond yourself. And of course, we learn from each other and we show each other, you know, I've shown these types of stamps before. But also, even though most of the club is aged, nowadays they call it an old man's activity, which it basically is. There's an
Old person.
old
We
person.
have some ladies.
There, we do have a couple ladies, thank God. But nevertheless, some are new at collecting, so we offer them our help, our assistance.
So it's a wonderful
But-
opportunity to learn more
Yes,
about
Right.
And
your emerging hobby.
The senior center has been wonderful
And-
for us because they advertise in your newsletter, and we've acquired 3 new members so far in a short period of time. And on the average, we get a couple of people coming in every meeting, and either they have questions or they have some stamps they want to eliminate, or so. And we managed to get some of them involved, the 3 people so far. So it's really good.
And Rich and I started a new habit at the club around Christmas time, and that is to share our philatelic holdings with other people. So I would make up, and Rich would do the same,
Presentation.
significant lots that they weren't trivial. Some of the lots I would make up would be catalog value of $50, because I got a lot of stuff. And I'd make up enough for every member of the club. And then I have these little squares with numbers on them, and everybody would
Oh yes.
take
yes,
a number.
yes.
And then, this is at Christmas time, and then everybody would pick one of the lots. If you're number 1, you got your first pick, etc. And Rich would do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we do share tremendously with the other. And if some new person comes in, we shower them with stamps, free stamps.
How wonderful, though.
But to get them started.
Get
Well,
a-
if you
a
ever
little jump
When I
start.
saw my stamp done, you realize
Starter pack.
I had another moment. I got to get rid of some of this stuff.
So you mentioned albums. Are they in bookcases or boxes, or do you have a stamp room or
How about rooms?
rooms? Okay.
Yeah, it starts off as a
You would not believe.
drawer collection, and then it turns into a closet collection, then it turns into a room collection, and yeah.
And after stamp collectors get divorced, it turns into a house collection.
Right.
I'm not saying that stamp collectors have any more of a divorce rate than anybody else, but depending upon a lot of things, because it's become such a passion,
Correct.
sometimes the spouse feels neglected. I don't know about your
Well,
spouse.
my response to the spouse on that type of situation, I'm not out at a bar. I'm not out golfing. I'm not out bowling. I'm here with you.
And you're not out chasing wild women.
Correct.
I stopped doing that when I turned 75.
He's still doing it. He's still doing it, yeah. But,
Women, join the stamp club to meet men. I love it. How many hours a week, month, day do you spend as collectors?
myself,
Yourself.
I'm a fall winter collector.
Mm-hmm.
I have my gardening and other things during the summertime. I do plants and like vegetable gardens and all of that. But in the wintertime, I'm probably up in my office every night for a couple hours.
A couple of hours.
It relieves, especially when I was working, it will relieve stress.
And so,
Just like you're in the vegetable garden, you're in another world. Same with stamp collecting. You get involved with the stamps that you're working with, whether they be pre-cancels, which is a stamp that has a city name on it, socked on the nose, the cancels that are directly on the stamp, and cancel collections or mounting covers. Reading the letters. It's you're in another world, and the stress is gone. You just relax and love it.
I want
Now,
to.
David.
Oh,
You be prepared for David.
well,
I'm ready.
I've slowed down. I only spend about 2 to 3 hours a day.
a mere 2 to 3
A
hours a day. Yeah.
At least 2 to 3 hours.
But
Every day of my life since I was 7. Well, not every day, but certainly in my retirement.
so you have amassed a vast amount of knowledge and a great deal of joy.
Absolutely. I want to make one more point. I don't know if we're running out
Sure.
of time.
No, you're doing great.
There's an immersion that is hard for people to understand. For instance, if I'm examining stamps from any particular country, let's say it's finely engraved and it has a pictorial scene. I'll take my 20 power magnifier and I will study that stamp simply because it's beautiful. Sometimes it's multicolor, sometimes it's not. And it could be a scene. Countries like to advertise their topography and their forests, their cities, and whatever it is. And a lot of these stamps are finely engraved. They're works of art. These are little works of art. And I'll pour over that stamp. And as I look at it, let's say it's a picture of a garden. And in the background, there's a quaint cottage. And all of a sudden, my mind will focus on that stamp to the point that I'll be saying, I wonder how many people walk down that garden path to live in that idyllic cabin in the woods. And I conjure up a story in my pea brain. And it totally takes me away from whatever's happening. And this is the therapeutic part of the hobby.
You are engaged
Wow.
and immersed and brought up the whole other area. There's much we haven't spoken about, but international stamps. Do you specialize in U.S. stamps, countries, the world?
The world.
The world.
I used to collect the world. Now it's basically U.S. And I will pick up foreign covers of interest, but generally mostly U.S. And there's so many different outlets on U.S. material, whether it be mint, used, cancels, covers. It keeps me very busy, which I like.
And you mentioned magnifying glasses. Are there other tools of the stamp collector's trade?
Well, you have tongs, okay, and
There's watermark detectors.
watermark detectors.
There's
You-
measuring devices.
You have the
and by the way, there are
perforation gauges.
perforation.
Right.
There's many tools that are eventually become necessary if you're serious, especially if you're going to spend money. And I don't mean hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if you're going to spend $20 or $30, you want to know that that stamp is in good condition. Now, you can always have it expertized, but generally speaking, you don't expertise stamps that have a value of less than a few $100s, because expertising costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. So you have to do a lot of the expertising yourself. I never advertise myself as an expert, but I'm extremely knowledgeable. Not because I'm smart, but because I've been collecting for 81 years, and I've been reading catalogs, and I've
You
studied.
absorb the knowledge and it stays with you, especially if you're active with
And
it all
I've
the
had,
time.
if I want to flatter myself, I have people that call me professor. But it's only because of the length of time and the fact that I've been so interested and took the time. But in the end, you learn how to protect yourself.
Well, Dave, it sounds like you've earned the respect with your 81 years of experience and knowledge and what you've put into it. That's absolutely incredible. I will ask if you have any parting words, but first, tell me about the future of stamp collection, because I don't think there are as many letters as there used to be.
No.
And what does that bode for the future of your hobby? Maybe they're rarer and that's good.
Well, there'll always be stamp collectors. And the reason is this. Stamp collecting is an easy hobby to get into, and you can get into it with very little money. But there'll always be people who are interested in the more expensive stamps, and there will always be millionaires. And these guys will pay insane amounts of money
For rarities.
for rarities.
You guys aren't the millionaires, though.
No.
Oh, okay, just checking.
No. However, as an example, I'll make this a quick story. The most valuable stamp in the world back in say,
Penny black.
1947, and is now once again the most valuable stamp in the world, is the 1 cent British Guiana,
Yeah,
which has a fantastic story behind it. But this stamp is only one of a kind. And I attended the 1947 stamp exhibition in New York City, which they displayed this stamp. That was the 100th anniversary. Our first stamp was 1847.
Oh,
So 1947, it was a big exhibition. And the stamp was there. And I tried to find the facsimiles that were readily available at that time to show you. But it's an ugly stamp. And at that time, it had been sold for $50,000.
Right, just
And on the back of the facsimile, it said, "This is the most valuable stamp, facsimile of the most valuable stamp in the world. And it's worth $50,000. That was in 1947. At some point in time, a very wealthy man who inherited a chemical company,
DuPont, wasn't it?
DuPont.
Right.
His name was DuPont. He bought the stamp and paid, I think, $1 million for it. It was considered an enormous amount of money at that time. He became involved with athletes for the Olympic wrestling team, and because he inherited the DuPont fortune, and he built a wrestling compound where he hired and trained people for Olympic wrestling. But he fell in love with one of the participants, and when it became obvious that one of his instructors was also fond of this guy, he shot and killed him, and he ended up in jail for murder for the rest of his life, which he died in jail. But that stamp, the most valuable stamp in the world, was put in a safe deposit box. And after he died, the estate put it up for sale. Would you care to guess what it brought 3 years ago?
What was it, 2.3 million or something like that?
$9.3 million.
9.3 million, yeah.
what a great story. Murder, love, intrigue,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
a lot of
lots
zeros
Lots of
on
this
that.
in stamp collecting.
From what I understand, one of the individuals from the one of my other clubs seen the stamp after DuPont bought it and it went up for sale. And the condition of it was I don't know what DuPont did to that stamp, but it was really ragged, nasty looking. He basically destroyed it,
But
It's
still,
but still, it's still a rarity. But the condition. I just want to make a
let's hear it.
minor point here. One of the things that the Pioneer Valley Stamp Club does, if a family is interested in selling somebody's collection, we do purchase collections. That's what keeps us going. So, and then we auction
Great
it
to
off.
know.
Auction it off to the members. That's how it works.
And that's something that could come up as people move, downsize, purge.
Every now and then we get a phone call, or I get,
Well, also, some of our members are almost dealers. So we say almost because they're not necessarily full-time dealers. And they, fortunately, put up a lot of lots at the auction. And we have some pretty vigorous bidding on these lots. So the people get to sell stamps they don't need or want, and people get to buy stamps for their collection. And I buy a lot of stuff at the club, especially Richard's covers. He does have a lot of nice covers. I will end with one picture. I wanted to do this for Rich as a joke. And the joke goes like this. Rich, did you know there's a dealer in California that's selling his stock because he wants to get out of the stamp business? And I decided to buy his stock of stamps. Every dealer has very large stock that he accumulates over the years. One thing that happens when you buy collections, you tend to focus on the more expensive stuff. Then the other stuff goes in boxes for some future time. Dealers operate the same way. So, Rich, I wanted to show you this picture because this is the stock of the dealer. Okay? And this is true. This is the dealer's stock. It's in a warehouse. And this warehouse is as big as a football field. These are all boxes and albums.
So one dealer
I
has
have
a
no
warehouse
idea.
full, a complete warehouse full of.
There's probably 10 million, 20 million, 100 million stamps.
Oh my, that's a lot of stamps.
But that shows you how many stamps there are in the world.
Well, I like that picture. I got to show that to my wife.
Right,
You think I
right.
have a problem? Look
Yeah,
at this.
yeah, it could be worse.
Yeah.
It could be
You better-
It
worse.
looks like it's very well organized.
Oh, yeah.
There's,
Right.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
organized.
it's-
I'm sure that each box has a value associated with it. I do this, and that's, I don't want to talk forever, but one of the things I've emphasized, I don't necessarily have to emphasize it with Rich because he knows this. People who have stamp collections should develop some type of inventory. I have bought collections where the husband was a collector, he died, the wife had absolutely no idea. Now, thank God, if I may brag, I'm an honest person. I always paid a price that I felt was about what a dealer would pay, which is fairly inexpensive. But dealers, of course, you realize they have a store, they got to pay
Right.
overhead, they got lighting, they got security, they got water, and they got rent, and they got employees. So if you bring them a collection that catalogs $25,000, you're going to be, unless it has some really scarce or impressive stamps, he's not going to offer more than a few $100s for it. Now, if you're a rich person, that's different. You don't even, it goes up to auction, and individual stamps will be shown in a catalog, and people will be seeing that catalog from all over the world and bidding on it. A stamp may have an estimated value of $10,000.
Right. Some of these high-class dealers, they actually put out a book, hardcover book, of the items that somebody's collection. If it's a real expensive collection, the publisher,
Yes,
a hardcover book, and they send it out to.
Some of the auction catalogs,
Yeah.
you can't, they don't just deal them out. For instance, the stamp collection of Ryohei Ishikawa, who was a famous Japanese collector, had the most astounding collection of early U.S. stamps ever assembled. And to get the auction catalog, you had to pay $50.
Right.
You wouldn't believe this catalog.
Well, it'd be
And
gorgeous.
it's hardbound. It's hardbound.
Bound, full Full color, gorgeous.
And he had so many rarities and unique items, such as the United States first issue stamp that you saw and the Canadian first issue stamp that you saw, all on one cover, unique. Because at the beginning, the United States postage would not cover postage in a foreign country. So if you mailed a letter to Canada, your U.S. stamp only paid up to the border. And then you had to have a Canadian stamp added. Well,
How complicated.
yes. And this was all over the world. And then eventually they created the Universal Postal Union, which did away with this archaic process, which was a pain in the neck. But the cover, it was like $1 million cover. Because it was the only one where both number 1 US and number 1 Canada appeared on the same cover. That was the nature of his collection. When it was sold, I forgot how much it brought, but it was excess of $10 million. But he would reputedly try to get stamps which are very rare, and he was able to locate collectors who had them. Keep in mind that most collectors don't sell their collection until they pass away. So if they didn't pass away and the collection didn't go up for auction, how did he get that rare stamp this person had? He actually would visit them, come from Japan, and look them up and somehow communicate with them and say, I want to buy your, he'd find out that they had a certain valuable stamp. And I don't know how he would do this because most people don't advertise that they
Everybody
buy
has a
valuable
price,
stamp.
I guess.
But the guy was very wealthy, so I'm sure he had a way of finding this out. And the person would say, I'm not selling this stamp. He says, well, how much did you pay for it? And the guy said, I paid $600,000 for it. And he'll say, I'll give you $2 million. Oh. And he would acquire stamps like, he didn't care what he paid. And when Ryohei Ishikawa, you don't have to know how to spell that, died, that was one of the biggest auction events of the century because of the number of rarities he had. But it illustrated how far rich people will go.
An event in the
Little
stamp
people
world.
like Rich and I, we don't offer $5 million for a stamp. I've limited myself to $3.5 million. How about you?
How about $5?
Which is a perfect segue. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I am struck by the fact that we've heard about this Japanese gentleman. Say his name one more time.
Ryohei Ishikawa.
Heinz and
DuPont.
And here we have Rich and Dave from East Longmeadow. It is a collectors for everybody at different levels. And it sounds like a wonderful way to be engaged in the world and to involve yourself with a worthwhile hobby.
Absolutely, yeah. So when are you gentlemen here for the Stamp Club here at the Senior Center?
The second and fourth Tuesdays of the month at 1 o'clock. And it's basically about 1 to 3. Sometimes we close a little earlier, but it's basically from 1 to 3 on second and fourth Tuesday of each month, year round.
And if you, either one, or anybody wants to come to the club,
The public
just
is
to visit
invited.
without the intent of joining, we invite you, and I promise you, I will give you a very handsome philatelic gift. It's not that I'm so generous, it's just that I got a lot of stuff. And I'm happy to share it.
Wonderful.
Okay, there'll be a free gift then.
So if you
come
want
in,
a few
yeah.
nice stamps, I mean, $5 or $10
Yeah,
catalog
sure.
letters.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I've given away a lot more than that.
I bet you have.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you
is
so
it-
much for coming.
Yes, thank you so much for coming in, gentlemen. We really
It's been fun.
appreciate you
Been
being
pleasure.
here.
Been
Yeah,
pleasure
yeah.
talking about
Yeah,
that.
it was great. It was great for you to come in. So thank you. That wraps up another episode of Stories from the View. We'd like to thank our guest, Rich Mastrodonado. See, I said it right. And Dave Mallalieu for coming here today. The Stories from the View podcast. It's available on the LCAT 01028 channel on YouTube, and it's on Spotify. If you have a story that you'd like to share on the program, please contact Pleasant View Senior Center Director Aaron Kobler by stopping by the Pleasant View Senior Center or by calling Aaron at 413-525-5436, extension 1401, or you can send Aaron an email at aaron.kobler@eastlongmeadowma.gov. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Stories from the View.